Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michele and I'm an independent demonstrator with Stamping Up here in New South Wales, Australia. So welcome for joining me today. And if this is the first time you've been on here, please jump on and let me know who you are and where you're from, because it's always wonderful to say hi to new people. Now, I have discovered that I have run out of Christmas cards for this season, mainly due to the fact that one of my children contacted me the other day and said, "Mum, I need some cards." So I ended up sending them my stash. So I thought today was going to be the day that I'm going to create some cards, and I'm going to do a bulk lot of cards, which means pretty much all these cards are going to be very much the same, maybe with a couple of differences just with the paper I'm using. But I'm going to make a bulk lot of cards. Now, I will make probably at least 3 cards with you here today, and as you can see, I am busy just doing some quick die cutting, just so then I can be ready to work with these for the rest of the day as well. So just excuse me while I take the last piece out of my die, and I'll show you what we're going to be using. So let me just move this out of the road, because we don't need that any longer, or not for the moment anyway, and I will flip my camera down. Okay, let me show you my desk view. Here we go. So the product that I'm going to be using today is called Magical Meadow. Now, I love this. I just think it is so beautiful. It's so soft. But the only problem for me is that our Christmases here are in the sweltering heat, not necessarily in snow. Hello, Deborah. Thanks for joining. So, but it is still such a beautiful sweet that I'm going to make cards, but I'm just not putting all the snowflakes and everything in it. This is the designer series paper, and isn't it beautiful? I mean, of course, you've got lots of other different ones in here with all the snow scenes, and here's another one that I've already used a couple of times. Just some beautiful papers. I love the colors. I'm a blue girl. What do you expect? Blue and green's my 2 favorite colors. So this one here is the one I'm going to play with today. Now remember, there's 2 sheets in every pack, so I'm going to get 6 cards out of these 2 sheets. So I've already started cutting this up, and I thought what I would do is going to pop this to one side, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut this up, because it is a big piece. It's not an all-over design, but I'm just going to treat it like it is an all-over design. Now, the design elements of this comes from this corner out and from this corner out. I'm not going to cut it directly down through the middle, because I don't want to have my cards on that angle. If I cut that piece out, I'm just going to get a tiny little bit of green. So the way I'm going to cut this is I'm going to cut it right across the middle, which is, because each one of these sheets are 12 centimeters square or 30.5 centimeters. And I'm actually going to cut this maybe just a little bit narrower. And I'm going to, because I'm going to mat these. So what I have done is I've got a card base. I'm going to have a mat, and then I'm going to have my designer series paper. Now, I like to work my card base to my mat is 0.5 centimeter difference. But from my mat to my designer series paper, or my next layer, is only going to be 3 mil difference. So if my card base measurements are 10.5 by 14.9, my next measurement down from my mat is going to be 10 by 14.4. So that means my designer series paper, I need to cut this at 14.1. So that's at 3 mil off. So I'm going to cut it in that direction at the 3 mil. And then I'm going to cut it this way. Again, my width of my card is 10.5. My mat is going to be at 10. So I'm going to make my DSP 3 mil narrower than that, which is going to be 9.7. And I'm going to cut that multiple. Now, I could have layered these 2 pieces up together, but I'm just going to cut one at a time because sometimes if you have too many layers, you don't get a nice cut. Marie, how are you? It's been a while since we've had you on here. So I'm going to also cut this one. Now has got a lot of white in it, but we are going to add, which is probably not really I really wanted. I'm going to keep this little piece here, but I can still work with that. So let's do the same with this piece. I'm going to cut this at my 14.1 because it's my DSP, and that's going to give me a really nice big strip here that I can cut down and add onto the sides of my cards on the inside. And then I'm going to cut this down again, 9.7. Whoops. On each one. And one more, 9.7. Now that's one sheet. And that's a little piece I can use, so I'm going to keep that again. So that's one sheet of designer series paper cut. So as you can see there, each piece is going to be slightly different. Okay, they've got different amounts of the image on there, but we can still work with all of that. Now I've just got one more piece over here which I have already started cutting, and I'm going to just quickly finish off cutting this piece here, so because I really do have to make lots of cards this year. And sometimes too, if you're not a scrapbooker, when you get your designer series paper, sometimes depending on your storage and how your storage works, sometimes it's a lot easier just to get it all and cut it all down to card front sizes. Now when I cut my pieces down to card front sizes, I actually cut them at 10 by 14.4, which is my mat size, just for the fact that not all the time I'm using a mat, so sometimes I want them up a bit bigger as well. If the roads and the weather are good and family will be here for Christmas. Oh, that'll be lovely. I hope the roads and the weather is good for you, Marie. Okay. So, as I said, I've already started cutting some of this. So let me just show you what I've cut and what colours I am using. So I've got here pieces of Misty Moonlight, and I've cut them in half. So they're my A4 sheets, so I've cut them all in half at 10.5. I have also got some, let's see if I can get all my Lost Lagoon, and I've cut those at my mat size, which is 10 by 14.4. And as I said before, I have all my designer series paper pieces cut at 9.7 by 14.1. So they're all pre-cut there. I've been die cutting, and I usually like working with, that's a this piece here would be 1/8 of a sheet of A4, because I like cutting them down to that size because they're easy to put through the mini cut and emboss machine. So I'm just going to, I've already cut those, that's okay. I've got some white, I can't remember why I've cut them, but anyway, we'll remember that in a minute. Maybe I changed my mind on something. And I've got some white pieces which are going to go on the inside of my card. Now these white pieces are cut at 10 by 14.4, so the same size as I cut my mat. Okay, so they're the pieces and the colors I'm going to use. Now I've already done some die cutting, and the dies that I'm going to be using for this is this one here, and I've cut that in the Lost Lagoon, and I'm cutting this one here, I've cut in the shaded spruce. Now it is very bright. It is one of the recommended colors that are in your designer series paper, and it is a very bright color. Now if you're not careful, it can take over your paper because it is so bright. But when I lay it up, I'm going to layer it up with my Lost Lagoon over the top, and that is going to mute it down a little bit. Okay, the other thing that I've got is I've got some pieces of basic white here that I've cut into, I've taken a sheet, A4 sheet. You can do this the same with your letter size sheet, but I've taken a piece of A4 and I've cut it into quarters. So that's 10.5 by your 14.9. And this is what I'm going to stamp my sentiments on. Okay. So let's get started, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to put these together. So I'm working on 3 cards at the moment because I've managed to cut 3 card fronts, which are those 3 there. So I'm going to pop all of this aside to later on this afternoon. And we're going to need 3 mats, 3 card inserts, and 3 card bases. So basically I'm making up half a sheet of that 12 by 12 designer series paper. Okay, so I'm going to start by folding these in half, and I just need my bone folder here to make sure I've got a nice firm crease, and I've already scored all of these. So when I cut my card bases, what I like to do is score them first. So whether I'm doing a tent fold or a book fold, I will score them first and then cut them in half in whatever direction I'm doing. So if you were wanting to do a book fold card, you would score it at 14.4 along your, let me just get this right. I've got to try to think back to front. Yeah, 14. You would score it at 10.5 along your longer length. No, you wouldn't. You would score it at 10.5 across your narrower width, and then you would cut it at 14.4, whereas I've done this the longer way. Sorry, I always do 10-fold cards because they're just a lot easier to photograph, and I've come to really love this fold. So I have to think nowadays when I come to do it the other way. Do I always use cardstock for the inside of my card? Yes, I do. I know that there are some people that like just to use something like a copy paper, but I like it that the fact that the I don't use the thick basic white. I use the regular basic white, and by doing a card insert in my cardstock, it just gives that extra weight to my card, particularly if I'm using like the colors in the cardstock. It just gives it that little bit of extra weight, because I think it's in America, I could be wrong, that the weight of your cards play a big part in your postage. So we don't have that here in Australia. We have a set postage rate. So if you're in an area where where they do take into account the weight of the card, then you probably would go to a photocopy paper just to take a little bit of that weight out. But you'd have to work out whether it's worthwhile, whether it's going to take that weight or not. The other reason why I like using basic white for my inserts or a cardstock for my inserts is because I can stamp on it if that's what I want to do to decorate it. I can sort of add just as much detail to the insert as I do to the front of my card, which I don't do a great deal, but I have done that a lot in the past. Okay, so now I've got those, but that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, Marie. I've got those all folded, so I'm now going to grab my mats and my designer series paper. We're going to pop these together. So I'm going to glue one of these on each sheet. So let me just grab my glue. I've got one here which is new, so we'll start with that one. Sometimes I find it's a lot easier when I'm making cards when I'm doing in a bulk lot. And I try to keep the design of my card fairly simple. Well, that's good to know. So what do you usually put in your card, Marie? Do you use a photocopy paper or do you prefer cardstock yourself? Now, what was I saying before? Oh, golly, my brain has been frazzled. I think it's the end of the year and I'm getting tired. I'm due for a rest. Yeah, because I'm doing a bulk lot, you want to keep these as simple as you possibly can. Just so then you can cut lots of it. It's not getting too intricate. So I mean, I'd probably only go to one or two dyes, one DSP, a matte. I love matting my DSP because I think sometimes a matte just finishes it off. And if you use something like a black matte, it'll make whatever colours you use pop. Um, Probably about 70% of my cards I try to matte. I know that I've done a few recently where I haven't matted at all, but I do like matting, and that's probably even come from my scrapbooking past as well. So yeah, it's yeah, I just really like a nicely matted card, and I think it just gives you that little bit of a professional look. You use both. Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with using, either way, using either your photocopy paper or your cardstock. I think it just all boils down to a lot of this is all personal preference. Okay, so now I have matted my designer series paper, and I'm going to pop each one of these onto my card front. Now, one other cardstock I haven't mentioned that we're going to use today too is some vellum, and I'm going to show you in a little while how I'm going to cut my vellum and why I am using it. So I'm just popping these onto here. Now, I do like using a multi-purpose glue because it enables me that little bit of slip time to be able to get these all lined up where I like them. I'm just being very careful. I've got some little tiny pieces, little berry pieces from the dies, which I'll show you in a minute over there. And I don't want them to go flying. And I've got a fan going on here in the room because our temperature here has all of a sudden hit summer. So I think we're supposed to have something up around about 31 today. But usually we don't get that until about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. But my little workroom here tends to get very stuffy. And I've got the blinds closed to keep the heat out because I'm on the hottest side of the house. And my fan is getting old and it's a little bit clunky. So if you hear that sort of vibrating noise in the background, that's what that is. And that's why I've sort of got my hair all tied up just to try to keep things as cool as possible. My husband keeps telling me at the end of every day, have you made ice? We need ice. It's my job to make the ice. Okay. So there are my cards done as far as that's concerned. Now we do have our card inserts, so I'm going to get all these done first. So I like to work in batches. Okay, when I'm doing something like this, where I'm making a batch of cards, you'd want some of that heat. I'll have some of your -7 then too, thanks. I love working in batches. I used to work in a clothing factory as a machinist when I first finished school, because as I've mentioned to you before, I run an alterations business. So my sewing started many years back when I worked in a factory, and I was a zipper girl. So my job was to put zippers into garments. I'm just picking up all these little bits and pieces that were left over from being cut off, and I've still got these big strips which I'll cut down later. And I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to adhere it to the sides here. And now there's a little bit of difference in my measurements, so I'm going to just take them in a little bit. So with working in a factory and being a zipper girl, you did things in batches. So, you'd be sent 10 garments that all needed a particular size zipper in it. They were all exactly the same. So I tend to do, when I do batch making, with my cards, and I'm not going to use that side anymore. I'm going to move it over. I tend to, if I'm doing lots of cards, do them the same. So I will make, like I'll put all the inserts, I'll put all the trims on it. I'm just going to let that dry because I've got glue on right side there, which is now my wrong side. Let's just pop that over there. So like I've done here, I've put all of my designer series paper onto my mats, did all that, then put all my mats and designer series paper onto my card fronts. Rather than just doing one card at a time, it just works much quicker and much more effective if you're making 10 cards, you do the same thing on all those 10 cards. So if you're die cutting, you die cut all your 10 bits and pieces into die cutting. If you are doing putting your mats on your designer series paper onto your mats, you do those whole 10 all at once. It just makes things go a little bit quicker and a little bit more smoother as well. So I like using the analogy of when I used to work putting zippers into dresses, because you did all the one style, all the one size zip, and then the next batch you might have got, which would be a different style of garment with a different size zip. So I keep working when I'm doing that way. And even when I was making face masks during COVID to sell at a local shop, I was doing that the same. So I was stitching all my linings in at once. I'd do 20 all the same, 20 stitched around, 20 putting the elastic in. And it just, I think emotionally or not so emotionally, you sort of, if you just did one at a time, it sort of slows you down. Whereas if you're doing it in batches, you feel like you're getting it done quicker. Now, because I made an error here and I got my sticky on there, my edges of my paper are sort of turned up a little bit. So I'm just going to run my bone folder all around, and I'm just being very careful here because I know I'm putting a sticky surface down. I don't want it to, number one, adhere to my paper underneath. But I'm just smoothing out all those cut edges so they don't have that little turn up. Okay, that's still wet, so I'm just going to leave that to one side. Actually, no, what I can do is stick them all into, talking about doing it in batches, let's stick all these inside our card, and then that will stop that problem of me gluing this to something that I didn't want to glue to. So let's open each one of these up. Give that a good rub. So there's one done. So Marie, do you have much snow there at the moment? Or is it just sort of so far just cold weather and no snow? Putting that one up. Okay, so there's our 3 cards all done. So that one was over there, that one was in the middle, and that one was coming from the side. So they're our 3 card fronts. And as you can see, they're all slightly different, but we're going to decorate them all the same. Now, the other thing I do want to do before I start decorating them is I'm going to be using one of the sentiments from the stamp set, and I'm using May the Season of Sparkle Bring Joy and Delight, because I didn't really want too much of a wintry type of Christmas theme. Let me put my lid on my glue, and here's our sentiment, and I'm going to stamp this with the Misty Moonlight ink. Now again, the same as when you're cutting a whole batch at a time, you can stamp at a time too. Make sure your stamp is the right way around, and just remember just to tap your stamp onto your ink pad. Because it's a foam, we tend to want to push it down, but by pushing it down you're going to lose some of the fineness of this stamp, and this stamp is one that has got a lot of fine lines in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm stamping these across. We're leaving a bit of space in between. And I'm going to stamp all of those together. So if I was going to do more, I would stamp more all at once. So for the moment, that's my stamping done. Pop that out of the road. Okay, so let that dry, and I'm going to bring in my little machine here. And as I said to you last week, what I like to do is I like to line up a portion of my trimmer with the edge of my ink, my stamped image. So I will pick a portion of the sentiment and use that as a guide to keep things nice and straight. Now, don't always assume you've cut everything straight, so you may not be able to take it right up to the top. You do just want to take your time with this, line it up with, find an element that you think is going to give you a nice straight line, and cut this. Now, I've cut, as I said before, I've cut these pieces here at 10.5, and it's a lot wider than what I want. My finished width of these sentiment strips is only going to be at my 9.7 because I want it the same width as my DSP. So what I'm using as my guide is the edge of this plastic plate that's here, and the bottom of each of these letters. So the bottom of the G, the bottom of the Y, and so forth. Now I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to use one of these lines now to be my marker. So I'm going to pop that on there, which is at 3/4 of an inch, and I think that's sort of will keep that all pretty nice and straight for me. And I'm going to cut each one of those at 3/4 of an inch, which is just below your 2 centimeters. So it's actually something like 1.9 centimeters. But I'm just using the grid that is on my paper or on my tool that I'm using. Now, no matter what tool you use, whether you're using a Stampin' Up tool or you're using the trimmer, you can still line things up the same way. Okay, this is a matter of you working out how you can make that straight and what lines you want to follow. I have even been known, because I've looked at where the screws are in this trimmer, my little guillotine here, and I've worked out, because they're a Phillips head, which is a cross, and I've worked out, okay, they're pretty much in line with each other. I've even used those as a guide if I'm wanting to cut something really small. So it's up to you how you work out how you want to cut that. Because some people also like to pre-cut then stamp. So you're expecting snow at the end of December, and then in January, February. Yeah, it's probably going to be the end of December when we get most of our heat here too. I'm actually heading to my parents' place for Christmas this year because none of my children are coming home. They're all got girlfriends, families, and so forth to spend Christmas with. So, and a couple of them are working. So, yeah, we haven't spent Christmas with my parents for a long time. So we're going out there, and it is going to be very, very, very hot. It's sort of more into, it's not central New South Wales, but it's heading out that way, and it can be very dry and very hot. Now, these sentiments, I do not necessarily want them in the middle, so I'm not going to centralize this. I have worked it out. I wanted it at 9.7, and I'm just cutting that down 9.7. So it's not centered on this piece because I'm going to have some elements here. So I do want this coming across this way a little bit more, just to give a bit of balance. And when I stamped these, I sort of tried to stamp them as well as I could in the similar sort of area. But again, if you want them centralized, then work out where the center is and just trim it off. So I'm trimming all these down to the same width. Now, if you want to, you can just sort of, because that one there looked like it was a little bit crooked, I'm just going to straighten that up a bit, and I'm taking that to 9.7 and cutting that down. So they're all now cut down to the size that I want. Yeah, I go out to my parents' place and it's so hot out there that I feel like I'm going to melt. So I probably do want some of your snow, Marie, when it comes to being out there at Christmas time. But it'll also get very hot here come January as well. So and sort of like that Christmas to January is always our season when we're going to get fires, we're going to get them. Now, when I was having a little bit of a play with this earlier, and I was looking at this one, particularly this one here, because when I layer this on, now, as I said, I'm going to pop this fern piece down first, and I'm going to pop this piece over the top. What I found is it looks like it's getting lost in there a bit. So I've got a piece of vellum here, and I've cut this vellum down using a one of the deckled dies, and it's one of the smaller pieces. And by popping that onto there, you can see that that is just going to lift my elements a little bit from the paper. So I don't need to put a huge amount of vellum. Hi, Linny, how are you? Don't need to put a huge amount of vellum underneath there, just a little bit, so it sticks out from underneath so you can see that the vellum's there. It's like another layer, but it's just going to separate the layers of the designer series paper with the elements you're putting on top. Now, the other thing I do want to do, so I'm going to show you first off actually how I'm going to cut this vellum, because we are, as I said, I'm doing it in batches. Now, because vellum is so much thinner than, say, your cardstock, you could do this with this quite easily. Now, I would probably only do 3 pieces at max, maybe 4, but I really wouldn't be doing it. And I'm going to cut these all at once. Now, you cannot do this with cardstock, okay? So don't try to do this with cardstock. So what I've done is I've cut each piece of this vellum a bit bigger than my die. So I think I've cut each piece at about 6 by 9. And I've layered up about 3 pieces there. I'm going to pop that on, and hopefully that will cut all of those really well all at once. Now, as I said, you do not do this with cardstock. You can only do it with very thin. And I'm going to run it through a couple of times just to make sure it goes through very thin vellum. And it's just another way of saving a bit of time if you're making a batch lot. So there you go. So there's my vellum, and there's my 3 extra pieces of vellum there. Okay. Now, one thing before we need to put this together is I need to pull out, I'm going to pull out 3 of these pieces that I've already die cut. And you can see on the top here, now it's up to you if you want to put the berries on there or not. I am. So what I'm going to do is grab my multi-purpose glue, make sure I've got it the right way around. Excuse me. And I'm going to pop a little bit of glue. Now I might need the other one. That one might be just a bit too empty. Now you do just want to use a little bit of glue. You don't want to squeeze out too much. Whoops, like that. That is way, way too much. So I'm going to grab a scrap of basic white cardstock. And I'm not going to scrape it onto my paper on the back. I'm just going to scrape that off. And then that little bit of glue there, don't waste it. I'm going to tap that onto each one of these. Now, by tapping that onto each one first, I'm allowing that glue just to settle a little bit before I start putting my berry pieces on there. Okay, so I'm just going to do, and you can also do it by just, if you're a bit afraid of putting too much glue, just put a little bit of glue onto the end of a scrap piece of paper and just use it like a brush. You do need to probably, this is so fine. Do need to hold this up and then just tap each one of these on. You don't need a lot of glue, and it's much easier to, with this, to put these, because those berries are so tiny, is to put the glue on this rather than the back of the berries. Now you could have used the adhesive sheets, and I did think about that, but I just sort of thought, oh, they might be just that little bit too small, because these pieces are quite little. Now what I want to do is pick up some of these, but I want to pick them up upside, from the right side up. So I'm just going to pick that up. Bring these all down here. Now I've got to do 3 of these. So I hope I've got enough of these cut. Whoops, that one there. Oh, there we go, that's better. And yes, I might have to cut some more of these. So there's one. I'm just going to pop that to one side and let that dry. Now really I'm just touching this with the wet tip of my glue. If you have too much glue on there, it's just going to ooze out too much. Okay. And this is where you take a pick tool, comes in handy, because you've got your putty end. I'm just going to flip some of these over so I've got them the right way around. Oops, I think that double flipped. Okay, a few more, and then we'll have to cut a few more berries for the next one. This one's a stick on my finger, so I'll pop it straight down. And I'll have to cut a few more, so just bear with me for a sec. Still got one missing from this I'm going to need, so I might have to cut 2 lots. So let's pop that there for the moment, and we'll cut these little dies here. You cut a whole stack all at once, and we'll just move this all out of the road. What is the stamp set? You missed that name. The stamp set's called Magical Meadow. I believe that the designer series paper is going to be carrying over, but I don't think the stamp set or dies are, because I think it's one of those papers that you could put lots of different things with and not necessarily the same. And I'm just going to, oops, must have a bit of glue on my fingers as it's catching on that die, and I'm just going to cut the second lot now. It's where these lots of little strips of leftover cardstock comes in handy. I'm going to see if I can pick them up directly from, and that's the one I've got one missing. Makes it a lot easier. It's stuck on there. Let's grab our third one of these and pop some glue on it. Now that tip with putting the glue directly onto a scrap piece of cardstock, I use that a lot when even when I've got to go through and sort of add a bit of touch-up glue to something, because it just means I don't have to be rough with my fingers on it. Oops. Sometimes when you're doing a lot of these, you will get a bit of glue in that to your take a pick tool or onto your fingers, which doesn't help when you're trying to leave something there and it keeps lifting back up with you. So I might just remove the tip of that off. See if I can get a bit more of this out. Must admit, I don't usually take the tip off my picker tool, the putty piece off that often. I usually can get away with using it for quite a while, but gee, it works nice when you put a clean piece of putty in there or wind it on. There we go. And I will just pop that over there for the moment because I can use them later on with the next lot I've got to do. So there we go. We've got all those little berries on there. So here's our front of our card. Now the one thing I will do is grab these sentiments and we're going to add some dimensionals to the back. That first one didn't want to come off too easily. So I'm going to add just 3 dimensionals across, one on each end and one in the middle. I'm not taking the backs off, I'm just popping all of those on because we're batch making. Whoops, there goes that sentiment on the floor. I'll have to get it up later. Always good when you're doing things like this to make maybe 1 or 2 more than what you need, just in case something gets a bit of ink on it or you accidentally get glue on it in the wrong spot or it falls on the floor. Okay, so they're all ready to go. So now let's put all this together. So what I'm going to do is adhere this first, and I'm going to use my seal to pop this on. And all I want to do is work out which is my right side and wrong side. That's my wrong side. I can tell that by the little lip that the dies have left on it. And I'm just putting a little bit of seal right there in the middle. And I'm going to layer that on there. So I'm going to do that to each one of these, because remember we're doing these in a batch lot. I want to try to put them in the same sort of place. So remember, I work in thirds, so I know my sentiment is probably going to be somewhere between halfway and my bottom third. So I'm just popping, I've got more space at the top than I have at the bottom, just for this. Now, if I wasn't happy with that, you could, if you worked very quickly, lift that off and move it, but I'm not going to. I've got a little bit of glue on the back on this paper, so I'm just going to give that a little bit of a rub. Let's start with this one. So we're going to pop one of these. So again, now this is where having a scrap of cardstock. So I've got, like, this is my scrap I had before. I'm going to pop a little bit of glue on there. Grab my die cut. And what you can do is you can just tap that in. Now, I don't like putting lots of glue all the way up. I just want to put a little bit of glue in those areas there. And I'm going to pop that slightly at an angle. And then I'm going to take one of these pieces and do the same thing, because I like to have a bit of lift in my card. So I'm not adding glue to the whole lot. I'm going to pop that going slightly at an angle in that direction. Now, if I wanted to put some of this and glue it a bit more further down, what I can do, again with my piece of cardstock, scrap cardstock here, is put a little bit of glue on there. And you can come in underneath and go, okay, I want that piece there. A little bit extra glue on that. So you just use it like a little paintbrush and tip it under. So it's always good to have little pieces of cardstock like that around. So once we've done that, I'm just going to take the backs off my Now, I probably could have done all of that on all of them and then put this on, but just for the fact that this is so fine and it's only glued in certain areas, I want this to help hold it down. Whoops, I've taken that. I want that coming in just that little bit. Just like that. So there's our first card. Grab another one of these. It's only the bottom half I'm putting glue on. And it doesn't matter if it's slightly bigger than your vellum. Now I just want that to come up a little bit because I want that berry there to be. There's our second one. That's good. Not enough glue on there to. Hear that? Now I'm going to, still more cards to make, so I'm just going to pop them to one side for the moment, along with that sentiment. Get rid of that gluey stick that we had. Now the only other thing I might pop on here just to finish this off again, this is something I like to have a bit of scrap of cardstock just to make sure I've got some of that Winker Stella coming out, and I'm just going to give this. Now I've learned you don't flick this up too high in the air because then otherwise you have Winker Stella going everywhere. You just want a little bit of it. I've only got my lid probably about an inch away from my work. And just adding that little bit extra to it. So there you go. There's my 3 cards. All the same, but because of where we cut the designer series paper, it's just that little bit different. And there we go. I did 3 down, another 6 or more to make. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me batch make my cards, and I hope that's inspired you if you need to make cards quickly. That this is a way of making your cards and getting them all done, particularly if, for a season like Christmas where we're sending out a lot of cards to a lot of different people. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to catching up with you again on Tuesday evening at 7:30. Thanks very much. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye for now.